Hello, everyone. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by Managing Director of Lunar Startups, Danielle Steer, and co-founder of Brown Venture Group, Paul Campbell. Hello and welcome.
Hey.
Both Danielle and Paul are leaders in the Minneapolis-Saint Paul region's robust startup ecosystem, which includes Forge North. The work of Lunar Startups and the Brown Venture Group is of strategic importance to the current and future competitiveness of our economy, because of the focus that you both have on BIPOC entrepreneurs and creating wealth and economic opportunities for and in communities of color. So I believe the entire Greater MSP partnership needs to know about the work you're doing and the impact you're having, so I'm thankful for our conversation today. Danielle, let's start with you. Lunar was created as a new model of business incubation for founders that identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ+, women, or non-binary. Tell us about the Lunar model and why it's an important evolution in supporting these innovators and problem solvers.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. When we launched in 2018 in partnership with Knight Foundation and American Public Media, we saw that the current offerings in the ecosystem, the resources, the programs were really not effectively serving BIPOC women and LGBTQ founders. So for example, startups that go through accelerator programs have a 23% higher survival rate within 5 years of exiting the program. In addition, those participants also receive an average of $30,000 worth of services, connections like legal support or accounting or marketing. And this dramatically reduces those startup costs, allowing them to kind of get to market and be more competitive more quickly. Yet when we look at the participation rates across the country, women, BIPOC, and LGBTQ founders were participating at extremely low rates for most accelerators and incubators, and so low that many of them didn't even report what those numbers were. So when we got started, we decided to just throw out the playbook because it wasn't working. And we rebuilt a new program with our founders at the center. So here are a couple things that are a little bit different about Lunar than other programs. The first is that our program is long form. It is structured so that founders who have responsibilities outside of just starting their business are able to opt in at a pace that works for them, while also accommodating the various other roles they might have within their family or their community. This includes no programming during daycare, school, drop-off, or pickup times. It means that when we were in person, which we hope to be again, we fed our founders lunch. We made sure that we could nourish their bodies so that they could nourish their minds. Another example. Black women are starting businesses faster than any other demographic. And we know that about 80% of those women work a day job to compete and to support their business and their family. So most accelerators require that an entrepreneur be, again, quote, full-time. But anybody who has worked with entrepreneurs that are very serious know that they are always full-time. They are 24/7 thinking about their business. So how they support their family is not necessarily critical to the potential and success of their business. Finally, one of the other things that we really focus on as an organization is confidence. Some of our most successful founders who've been through our program, we had to convince to apply. And I think that that is a step above that most accelerators are not going to go to when they're trying to get the 600, 700, thousands of applications. Our goal isn't to have hundreds of applications for the sake of quantity. It's really about searching and finding high potential companies who need access to coaching, who need access to resources, and would benefit from the cohort experience, and get them to a point of scale and convincing them that they have the ability, they have the drive, pushing their ambition, and really expanding the potential for what they, their business, and their community can do. Those are just 3 of, I would say, 25 things that are radically different about our company and our accelerator program relative to what you traditionally see in the marketplace.
And it's working.
It is. Yeah. I can give you some numbers if you'd like on how it's working.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. So we've got 32 alumni and 15 in our current cohort. Not one of those companies defaulted or closed due to COVID. Every single company that applied for PPP or EIDL received relief funds. When you track that relative to BIPOC and women entrepreneurs across the country, that is not the standard. When we look at earned revenue, our companies have earned nearly $9 million in revenue and attracted nearly $3 million in investment. But that's not just venture capital, that's traditional capital, that's revenue-based investment. There's a number of other alternatives that they're really looking at. A lot of our companies kind of going through are thinking about capital readiness when they exit. So many of them are embarking on their first edition of applying or going after angel or investment of some kind. Our companies have also created 56 new high quality jobs. And I qualify that by saying high quality because they're offering benefits. They know that their first through third employees, especially if they're hiring from within their own communities, can't eat options. They can't eat equity. They need to be paid. And so they're creating really great jobs by creating high revenue opportunities within the jobs that they're creating. I like to say that resilient people build resilient companies. And we have seen that through and through this year with the resilience of the founders and the work that they have done to really pivot and meet the needs of a new COVID economy. So those are a couple of the big highlights that we like to look at. There's so many more pieces that we think about that are valuable to us as we look at the success of the program, but those are oftentimes easy to understand.
It's fantastic. And you talked about capital, businesses run on capital. Dr. Campbell, you co-founded Brown Venture Group, which is focused on funding Black, Latino, and Native American tech startups. What is the big vision for your first fund?
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me. Much like Danielle, our vision was to kind of reinvigorate and disrupt the venture capital space as it is today. It hasn't worked for communities of color, and we wanted to know really why. Our data informed how we got started, kind of from a behavior economic standpoint of view, where we see only 1% of venture capital was going to Black founders, specifically Black women were getting something around 0.006%, statistically insignificant amounts of funds. So people say, well, there's a talent pipeline shortage. I'm like, that's not true at all. As we see, as Danielle pointed out, Black women from 2007 to 2018, I think the data shows have started companies faster than anyone else, 164%. And so the whole idea behind Brown Venture Group, really, we've seen a lot of the small businesses that have been out there, people doing that work, but we know that when you solve a business using technology, people don't have the opportunity to use biases like race or gender to discount the quality of the product. All they know is that it works. And so by doing that, we're able to bypass many of those biases that have prevented human flourishing within our community. And on top of that, we see what the data shows, that recently a report came out from Citigroup that something like $13 trillion of business revenue has been lost because of our own biases. And I say ours because we're all in this together, our own biases towards people of color and women and other communities we're talking about today. But with that said too, that's also 122 million jobs, that could have been created, well-paid jobs, to Danielle's point. And we really see this opportunity to invest in the community, not just as a feel-good story, but this is one of the best investment opportunities we feel like that's in the market right now that's being underutilized. Everybody wants to have an investment that's undervalued with high upside. And we see the underrepresentation rates is something like 80%, in aggregate between, Black, Native American, Indigenous leaders and Latinx contributors. And that's for us, it's a key issue is how can we unlock the suppressed contributions that can benefit not only our community, but America as a whole. That's what makes America great, is all these different diversity and thoughts and ideas that come together to really innovate. So that's kind of what we've been doing in that space. And as far as our format, we started off similar to Danielle, looking at the venture accelerator model, but we realized what's not shown in that model is the fact that there's no generational wealth that's in the Black and brown community. So to Danielle's point again, we have people who have to work full-time jobs that can't just focus 100% on their businesses all the time. So we have to think differently. So as we've been putting it, we're trying to innovate where venture capital has been wrong and use what's already working from venture capital to kind of accelerate.
Well, so the work that both of you are doing, and there's a little piano practice going on now, so you're picking that up. The work both of you are doing, is having a big impact in this community for those you're working with. And, as you said, Paul, it has the strategic opportunity for, the whole economy. I'll start with you, Paul. What could other leaders and organizations in this region do to sustain and grow the work you're doing?
Well, there's a couple of things. One of the things is we have to shift our thinking from doing things for communities of color and do things with communities of color. And the reason why I say that is because when we think of for, it's more or less a project. And then when we do things with, however, it's more of a partnership. So you begin to co-create solutions. You begin to think about intentional ways that we can build relationships with one another. And that, in fact, is one of the biggest problems that we have, is there's a lack of relationship within our communities, and people don't have any point of reference. It's not George Floyd and this person that's distant now. If we have a better relationship, it's George Floyd, my neighbor, right? And it changes that conversation. And so what I've seen too, from what the data shows, is that people have a pattern in America where we see these racial injustices being filmed, and then they prematurely discount their voice because they say, well, I'm a white person that I don't understand the problem's too big for me to solve. I feel so bad, but I can't do nothing, and it creates inaction. And so I'm saying, don't stop there. Realize that you do have a voice. You can say something, you could do something, even if it's small, and you don't have to go outside of your area of expertise. For example, if you're not in tech space, you don't have to go and start building. If you're in tech space, you don't have to start going out and building houses and things like that. If you don't understand that, you can stay within your area of expertise and still make a significant amount of contribution. And to that end too, is this whole idea of opening up not just investments into our communities, but also relationships where we're talking about supply chain. How can we become part of your supply chain? How can our companies add value to you and become an integral part of your business where you want it's co-create success together? Because I think when we start doing things with, it also pulls in other perspectives that's currently not on the table now, and it takes the whole, like, the problem's too big, and it makes it more human. I can help Paul Campbell out. I don't know about everybody else, but I can help Paul Campbell. He's my neighbor. He's in my community. And that shift will help a lot of leaders move past feeling guilty, which doesn't get us anywhere, move past thinking the problem's too big, and simplify it by saying, how can I be more intentional about what I'm already good at, helping people in the community that need the most help?
Well, so Danielle, just pulling that string. So how could leaders and organizations, and what leaders and organizations is Lunar looking to work with?
That's a great question. And I think that, again, this is another thing that makes us a little bit different than a lot of other institutions, because what we've seen, one example is I get called all the time. I would love to mentor a BIPOC entrepreneur, which I think is noble and a really great, interest and intention. What does that mean for the entrepreneur? How can you actually help them? And so what we find is that entrepreneurs are statistically over-mentored and under-invested. There's a mismatch in terms of people allowing or contributing time versus people contributing really capital. So like the talent and time and what the return is. So on average, we found, we did a small survey of the founders in our community. Our founders reported that it takes them 36 coffees, because we live in Minnesota and Minnesotans are very generous with their time, 36 coffees to move the ball forward in their company, when on average it takes their white male counterparts 6. That's a really big difference in time. And when an entrepreneur's greatest asset that they have control over is their time, we need to be lowering that amount of time they're investing in trying to build new relationships that aren't necessarily moving the needle. So we've developed the Lunar Expert Network. This is kind of like a flip of the mentorship model on its head, where we have a deeply curated, highly facilitated engagement where people can come in and apply to be a part of our expert network. We do an intake, what can you offer logistically, what can you offer from an expertise perspective? And then when our founders are going through their 24 milestones that they need to hit over the course of their program, when they have a question about, Timmy from Safe Resale right now is looking at fees associated with his fintech platform. So we've connected him to David Ness and a couple of other experts over at US Bank to say, hey, can you advise him on what it's like to structure fees in a fintech organization? And so they had a very specific kind of intro email that says, these are the outcomes, these are the needs, this is the conversation, go. And we think that that works better for 2 reasons. And one, clear expectations. What am I walking into the conversation with? And also an opt-out option. Minnesotans are so generous, it can be really hard to say no. But when we're really clear about what the need is, if someone can't offer it, they can say, I can't right now, thank you. Can the next person? The other thing it offers is a pathway towards true mentorship. I don't know about anyone else, but all of the mentors in my experience over my career have been long relationship building experiences. It's not a half an hour coffee. It's not a mentor swarm for 20 minutes where we meet and do a speed dating. It's, hey, I could use some help. Can you give me some advice? And then you continue to build on that relationship. So we train our mentors or our entrepreneurs on the other side how to cultivate those relationships, but we're clear about what the give and get is. So we're seeking additional experts that want to come in and contribute really discrete expertise, like customer engagement or segmentation, like fee structures, other things like that. And we have 16 different business segments that we structure those people in. The second thing that I'll say is, along with the over-mentored and under-invested, is that you probably have heard in the ecosystem, definitely if you're on Twitter, there's a mantra going around, hire and wire. And that, I would say, is both for the startups as well as for entrepreneurial support organizations. COVID has dramatically impacted how Lunar and several other ecosystem builders here in the Twin Cities are operating. Historically, 30% of our revenue or more for some of the institutions was really based in events. We don't get to do the same type of events anymore. So our relationship with our sponsors or our customers as nonprofits really shifts, and we're having to reimagine what that looks like. Similarly, with the entrepreneurs, a lot of times they get the mentorship, but getting to the point where they can be on the shelves at Target is like the big stretch. And luckily, we have great actors in our community, like at Target, like at General Mills, that are really trying to figure out what they can be doing actively to decrease the barriers to entry for more BIPOC women and LGBTQ entrepreneurs. And I think that we're going to see some pretty dramatic change. So one of the things, for example, Target is doing is on alternative financing. If they want to make a huge order from a retailer who's based in the Twin Cities, who has enough product and SKUs that they can be on the shelves, but maybe they don't have that $150K in their pocket today to make that big order from their supplier, they're connecting them with alternative financing options that really allow them to get into a place where they can make those orders and be a good vendor. That type of, and analyzing, if you have procurement goals, diversity procurement goals, like Center for Economic Inclusion is really working on with a lot of our corporations, being able to make small but such critical tweaks in that process and pipeline allows for you to increase the diversity of the vendors, increase the different types of companies and vendors that you're bringing into the organization, so you can actually invest in them. Because that investment in that retailer, in terms of the time and the energy to get them to a point where they're on your shelf or that they're in-house, as a SaaS model for your company, it can be really hard and long and arduous, but the small people inside that are making the movements and stewards and slight tweaks on that process really have major impacts in allowing those entrepreneurs to go from, what would be a small scale to huge in a really short amount of time. So those are some of like the big pieces. The final thing that I'll say is that, and Dr. Campbell already touched on this, our own choice to expand our networks. We know that Minnesotans oftentimes stay relatively insular. We hang out with our high school friends, or college friends, and that means that our networks can be somewhat closed, not intentionally. I think, life gets hard and it can be challenging to kind of open those things up. But spending the extra couple minutes, for example, if you're ordering a lunch for your teams and you're sending it to their homes for like a luncheon, now that looks different than it used to, sure, ordering from Panera is great, but what if you ordered from Soul Bowl? What if you ordered from another organization who can still help you meet that, but maybe represents a new community or a new experience? And I think that it's not easy to expand your network and to find those new people who can maybe serve you in different ways. But there are organizations like ours and others in the community that are happy to make introductions, that are happy to make referrals, and can help you along in that process. I want to honor that it is hard work to expand our networks. It is hard work to do that deep thinking on like, where can we really move the needle? What's our lane? I think that's really important too. But making that effort goes a long way in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it takes some intentionality, and a little bit more time, but it's doable. And people are doing it. And this is the moment when, we need to be purposeful and intentional. And maybe we could link this video to the network. So if people want to get connected and they have specific things to offer, that they can do that. Well, let's look ahead. And Paul, you kind of started doing this already. You're kind of laying the groundwork for what might be kind of a vision of the near future. For both of you, and we'll start with Paul, this is a moment filled with urgency and opportunity to advance both racial justice and accelerate our region's innovation ecosystem. We need to do both those things. What do you hope the ecosystem will look like in 2, 5, or even 10 years from now?
Yeah, so I think we're at a really interesting spot in our nation's history too, where what's happened here in our backyard has actually moved the conversation so far beyond just feeling bad and not doing any action. A lot of companies have stepped up. I believe that the Twin Cities region is one of the most underutilized regional advantages that we have that we haven't really been as intentional with. The relationships we have here, if you look at the history, which I love history a little bit too, studying like the early on, like how 3Ms got started, Cargills and those folks, it was a community that came together, and it was us doing this together, and we rose together. But the people who weren't there were the African-American communities, you know, BIPOC and so forth and so on. We see a pathway where we can see, and a vision really, where we can see the first Black brown founded, you know, Fortune 500 company to be added to the list of Fortune 500 companies. And how we do that is as a community, as each person, as Lunar Startups is doing what they're doing, and we would do what we're doing, we can start making these intentional relationships. And then the supply chain folks that manage Target and Best Buy and so forth, others, they can be a part of that narrative and say, hey, where are the products that we can put on ourselves that we can start highlighting? So we have the Silicon prairie here, right, where we have a lot of great innovative technologies, and how can we return to some of those elements of the bold north that made us who we are as a culture, and then move that forward and say, let's now include others to unlock the contribution. So I see a pathway as we become more intentional, we can really unlock and unleash our innovative capacity as a region to better all of the world. Essentially, we have a global footprint, I believe. And also, with that being said, is that we're focusing on big business, but I think it trickles down to small businesses too, because without these institutions, these gathering places, these, for example, Golden Time Coffee Shop in St. Paul, without places where we can get together and engage in meaningful relationship and talk about these issues together, I think it makes it hard for us to move forward. But I'm really bullish on what we have to do here in the Twin Cities. I think we've seen enough. We've had enough of these traumas that we want to end this, and we don't do it separately. We do it together, I believe.
Absolutely. Danielle, your vision for the future of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I love this question as someone who identifies more as like a visionary type of person. So I think that there's a couple different things that I'm really hoping that we can see. You know, the mission at Lunar Startups is to create a more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem where all entrepreneurs have the resources they need to thrive and build, you know, big businesses. We like to say that we're in the business of making more Minnesota millionaires who are building community wealth, creating great jobs. And really that big ambition is rooted in this idea that, you know, at ground zero of a social reckoning in our country, we have an opportunity to lead in a brand new way because of the rich history that Dr. Campbell talked about, but really creating an unshakable, holistic system of support that is rooted in our entrepreneurs that are the most marginalized and historically underinvested and, quite frankly, underestimated, so that we can really build a new economy. That's going to create the gravitational pull, I think, that we need for talent, for capital, for new ideas, for new jobs that are reshaping and you know, responding to this new economy. I think that a big part of that is going to be mindset change. To something Dr. Campbell said earlier, we need to shift from charity to change. You know, Elaine Rasmussen, who we oftentimes work with in the ecosystem, often talks about how there's people who respond in a charity base, immediate resources, human resources, human services, things like that. People need to eat, all of that. We're looking at Lunar Startups and several other of the nonprofits that are in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Systems change. It's not working. We need to reimagine what the future can be. And the Lunar Universe, we're hoping, where we can create this interconnected network of entrepreneurs that are really helping to build each other up, again, informed by our rich history. It's really the elevating of these new titans of industry that are going to be so critical to our future. So my ambition is that we can create a mind shift, you know, both for the entrepreneurs, building their confidence, building their ambition, as well as for the community, seeing that when more of our BIPOC women and LGBTQ founders are succeeding, we all do better. We know, and another mind shift thing I hope that people will start to kind of internalize a little bit more, is that diversity is a revenue driving asset. It is not, you know, an initiative. It is not a department. It is one of the greatest strategies a company can implement in order to drive revenue. We know that statistically. McKinsey has done some great research on that. The Greater MSP has been helpful in disseminating across the community. So I think that when we can really internalize and start to build in the strategies for more inclusion in leadership positions, more representation in budgetary decision-making positions, we're going to see the returns for our community at large, and we're all going to do better.
Well, I want to thank you both for the energy and the risks that you're taking, and the time you're putting in two important areas that are obviously connected at a time when it matters most to our community. So thank you. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.
We're talking, we're working together, and I look forward to continuing that in the weeks ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
All right. Thanks.